The Bible contains plenty of information about serving in the military. Christians can rest assured that being a soldier is highly respected throughout the Scriptures and know that such service is consistent with a biblical worldview. From the beginning of time, conflict between members of the human race has been obvious. In Genesis 14, Abraham's nephew Lot was kidnapped by the king of Elam and his allies. In response, Abraham gathered an army of 318 trained men and promptly defeated Lot's attackers and protected the innocent. Late in its history, the nation of Israel developed a standing army against Saul's reign. King David expanded the army and chose Joab as commander. Under David, Israel also became more aggressive in its offensive military policies, and later Solomon expanded the army by gathering resources such as chariots and horses. The army was active as long as Judah existed. In the New Testament, Jesus interacted with a Roman centurion, an officer in charge of 100 soldiers, who demonstrated a clear understanding of authority as well as his faith in Jesus. Jesus did not denounce the centurion's career. In several places in the New Testament, centurions were praised as God-fearing men of good character. Christian men and women who serve in their country with character, dignity, and honor can rest assured that the civic duty they perform is condoned and respected by our sovereign God. Those who honorably serve in the military deserve our respect and gratitude. People watching this video will be introduced to individuals in our church who served the United States of America in times of both war and peace, on native and foreign soil, and often in very difficult circumstances. There are 4 great conflicts that have defined modern America: World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and the War on Terror. Let's go back in history a bit to set the stage for the stories that will be told today. The instability created in Europe by the First World War set the stage for World War II, which broke out 2 decades later and would prove even more devastating. Rising to power in an economically and politically unstable Germany, Adolf Hitler and his National Socialist or Nazi Party reared the nation and signed strategic treaties with Italy and Japan to further his ambitions of world domination. As a result, thousands marched off to war to fight the oppression represented by Hitler. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt summoned the hope of a nation and the world when he stated, "We look forward to a world founded upon 4 essential human freedoms: freedom of speech and expression, freedom of every person to worship God in his own way, freedom from want, freedom from fear." Beech Springs Baptist Church saw many go to war during World War II. Our church history talks of our pastor calling the congregation to the altar to pray for those in the heat of military conflict. At this time, we will turn our attention to the stories of this group of people identified by Tom Brokaw as America's greatest generation.
We went to Cormons, Italy. It's up in the northern part of Italy. I was in the 752nd Tank Battalion, and I was driver in a half-track. And we run the border between Austria and Italy. They was smuggling guns across at that time, and we run that there for a while. And then on the last 6 months, I was in the Special MP at the base. And that's about all I got to say.
December the 5th, 1942, I was called in the military in Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia. Went down there and spent one night, got rested in, and so they had to go back home, stay a week. I went back down there and stayed about 5 days, and they put me on a troop train, and I didn't know where the world was going to. And I wound up all night on a troop train, wound up in Camp Breckenridge, Kentucky for basic training. Well, I stayed there for about 2 months, and then we loaded up and went to Tennessee maneuver down in Lebanon. Stayed down there 2 months till it got cold, and then they wound up going in. And during that time, they had me on a 2.5-ton truck, driving the truck. Well, I was transferred to troops to down in Alabama. So I went down there, we all got down there, settled down, and I was assigned to 98th Division, 367th Field Artillery Battalion. Signed in motor pool, put me on the truck, and stayed on there, and then stayed there for about 3 or 4 months. Here we loaded on a troop train again, straight north. Didn't know where in the world we were going to. Got to Chicago, made a left turn onto the West Coast. Got out there, stayed there about 3 days, and we board ship, troop ship. From that troop ship, we got on it 5 days out in the Pacific. One morning long, about break of day, I sat on top of that. I could see a mountain off out there. And well, we're somewhere, I don't know whereabouts. They still didn't know. No, wound up, we was in Pearl Harbor. And that Pearl Harbor stayed there then for about 18 months in Hawaiian Islands. Well, while I was there, we took amphibious training. And I had an amphibious duck. I was all around all the islands in Hawaii on that duck. And then we were all ready to hit for Japan. All ready to go in about a month's time. Here they dropped that bomb over there. So that stopped us, from going at that particular time. For about 3 weeks then, they loaded us up then in Pearl Harbor, set out for Japan. Went to Japan, and so they, after the war ended, after the peace signed, we went there occupied that place then for about 3 months. And then the final roundup was they put on a little old troop train over there, Japan, took us down there and put us on a ship. Back we let out. 2 weeks we was on that ship back heading to San Francisco. Got there, and those golden gates you've always heard of in California. Looked up and you could barely see them. The fog was so bad. Well, they unloaded us there, and then finally they got us on another train, Camp Chaffee, Arkansas. Got there, and while we was there, got discharged. Then was on our way home. That was the best part of it.
When I got my notice, everything was fine as far as I was concerned. Went to Fort Oglethorpe, they took me in, stayed down there for about 2 weeks. We were supposed to get a pass to Chattanooga the next night, but we shipped out on Friday. And George says, we was on a troop train, we didn't know where we was going. We knew we was going south, the only thing we could tell. And we wound up in Miami, Florida, put us on a truck, took us across the causeway there into Miami Beach. And you talk about living it up, country boy did there for a while. I was in a hotel, 3rd floor, Ocean Drive and 4th Street. We did a lot of training and everything. We did everything we were supposed to, but that was a good part of the service as far as I was concerned. I went through AM school, airplane mechanic school in Mississippi. Went to California, met a crew out there and trained in the B-24 bombers. We headed overseas then. We went into the 13th Air Force, and we went from one island to another. We landed in Australia, went to Admiralty Islands, Wacky Island, all those. And well, it was on Morotai. And that was where our biggest airstrikes. Spitfires from England. Their pilots came over there. They said, get them in a spotlight for 10 seconds and we'll guarantee you they won't be back. And they was right.
I was assigned to LST 522 the whole time after I got my training. And we went to England. We took part in the Normandy invasion. Over there Germany had flying bombs. You could hear something like we called them washing machine motors back in. We didn't have them. And when that motor cut off, the bomb was going to land somewhere. So we was anchored out there in the English Channel, and I'd had radio watch the night before, so I was sleeping in my bunk. I was in the top bunk, and all at once, I thought I got blowed out that bunk, but I must have jumped out. But that bomb had hit in the river there close to my ship. It didn't hit the ship, but it was strong enough it caved that side in. And I'd been gathering up a little fruit cocktail and stuff to have to eat on. And I had it sitting on a ledge, and it blowed it out in the floor. And then people come down there to see what was going on. They said, it's blowed up the supply room. But I didn't get injured, but the steam was going everywhere, and I didn't really know what was going on. So.
I've always heard that anybody was in service would have drinking parties. I didn't. I did not drink a drop of any kind of alcohol while I was in there. But I couldn't say that about all of them. But I know I had one friend. We'd go out to the Post Exchange at night. We'd sit there and eat ice cream, and he'd just sit there and drink their beer. It didn't bother me. You've got your own life to live, you know, and so that's the way I had to do.
Well, I always had the faith, but there's one thing. It's short. When I quit, we quit flying combat. We had to take some kind of a job. And the guy that had it before talked me into taking squadron engineer. And it was on Sunday, and they was going to check out a co-pilot for a first pilot. Well, I had to fly with them. Well, we made a few landings. We was in a radar ship, and we come in one time, the right gear buckled. It headed for the gully and the bank. And the first thing I thought of when I seen that, I could look out that little radio operator's window there, and I seen that gear start buckling, that I hadn't went to church that morning.
Well, I always felt like the Lord was going to look after me. And I knew we had people back here praying for me.
From 1947 to 1991, a sustained state of political and military tension existed between two powers in the Western Bloc, dominated by the United States with NATO allied powers and powers in the Eastern Bloc dominated by the Soviet Union, along with the Warsaw Pact. During this time, two major powers with nuclear weapons never met in battle military combat. The powers engaged in psychological warfare and indirect conflict that could have led to another world war. This period is called the Cold War. The Korean War, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the Vietnam War took place during this time. With the 1950s came Korea. In the words of President Harry Truman, in the simplest terms, what we are doing in Korea is this. We are trying to prevent a third world war. Once again, America's men and women marched off to battle to protect our wonderful nation and those held so dear.
Started out going in with, after the war, they had a buddy program where you could join you and your buddy. So after the war, the vets coming back, and I had a brother-in-law that came back. And so he was going to go back in because he couldn't find jobs and this and that and other. So we went up to join together. Well, we sitting there, and he says, the sergeant says, well, you boys going to go here, and he was talking to both of us, and one of them said, well, I've been down there once. He said, what? Yeah, I said, I was the second tour. And he told him he'd been in and had children. He said, you ain't going. I said, well, I won't either. He said, no, you done said I do, so you're going. So I went to 17, went to Camp Fort Jackson, South Carolina. Boot Hill, took training. From there, they sent us down to Camp Gordon, Georgia. And the camp was being reactivated. Just the troops, there wasn't nothing in there. So they started another company. They started the 169 Signal Construction Company. And that was and we got them together and told them, went through the line, went to New Mexico, White Sand Proving Ground. And buddy, I'm telling you, we drove out there. It took us 7 days to drive them trucks out there. But didn't like it, but when you're in Mexico, in that area, the longer you stay, it grows on you, the better you like it. Before I left there, I loved that part of the country. In fact, I've been back several times since. But that was where the rockets started. They had lines in that place for 250 miles up the valley. and they had lines. Started out there at the blockhouse. They had 10 cross arms, 10 wires on each one, and we ended up with 2 wires. It looked like little outhouses all up that valley. But they could tell you what shape that rocket was in, where it positioned, how straight it went up, how much it traveled, the earth traveled before it hit back down. And they shot so many of them, so you get used to it. But that was the beginning of the NASA, I think, because they, it and your little drones, they was really shooting them things off there. And so I've become a man in that area by doing the work and learning to do in the telephone. And we trained when the Korean War broke out. As all of them went over into Korea, but 17 of us. Rest of us stayed there, and they sent 200. We had 150 men from Texas and 100 from New York, and we had to train them so you could see the conflict from the Texans and the Yanks, and we had a good time. See, the war was over, and they had captured the V-2 rocket scientists. They had them out there. As a man, every day you'd see them, there'd be a man on each side of them. There's 2 men with them 24 hours a day. They got them those rocket scientists, to eat, you'd set it in front of them. Drink, they'd set it in front of the food in front of them. Their mind was in one track, and they'd never think about eating or anything until they showed them in how. And it was amazing how it was developing.
Yes, sir. I turned 18 in 1945 in October. I was drafted and sent to Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia for examination, physical examination. I passed and came back home, was waiting for the Army to draft me. The war ended and the draft was canceled. So in 1948, I wanted to serve in the armed forces. I tried to join, my dad wouldn't let me. So I joined the National Guard in 1948. But in July 27th, 1950, the Korean War began, and our unit was the first one that was activated. So in August, we went on active duty, and we were stationed in El Paso, Texas, Fort Bliss. And at Fort Bliss, at that time, I had been promoted to the rank of sergeant, and that brought some benefits with it. I didn't have to take basic, and I could live off base. So Ruby and Gerald were with me for the full time that I was in service. Of course, I took basic training at Fort Jackson, and the only basic training I had was in the kitchen peeling potatoes. I was on KP every time. Lo and behold, when I went overseas, I got on the ship, and the first thing they called was, Leon Drennan, report to the galley. And they put me in charge of 6 KPs. In February of 1951, our unit was called up to go to to Korea. At that time, the Chinese Red entered the war, and they started at the Yala River. Port of deportation was in Incheon, Korea. And in one day, they marched from the Yala River in the northern Korea all the way to Incheon. So we had 800 tons of equipment at the POE in Seattle, Washington, ready to go. And at 3:30, we were ready to step on the train. They changed our orders because we didn't have any place to land. And we were sent on to Yuma, Arizona to test the new Rio trucks. Army had just got the new issue, and we were in the desert out there testing them. So After 3 months there, we were deployed to France, Labacon, which was in just right off of the southern seashore of France. And at that time, we were to set up a static storage depot. And I was in charge of the master locator system, and we were to place one item, everything the Army had in the ordnance, in that unit. It was a 5,000-acre forest, and it rained all the time we were there, and we waded mud to our knees. But after serving there, I was getting ready to come home, and we went to Germany. And after that, then I came back to the United States and was discharged in Kentucky. So I didn't see any active duty, but I enjoyed the time in service I was there.
It has been my privilege to serve the greatest nation in all history, the United States of America. I still